My name is Amelia Carter, and the day my father called me a nobody in court was not the first time he tried to erase my worth. I was born on September 4th, 1988, in a small town outside Vicksburg, Mississippi. My father, James Carter, was a respected rancher who valued lineage and sons above all. He ran our cattle and soybean spread with an iron hand and believed that daughters were burdens to be married off. My mother, Sarah, was gentle and kind, but seldom challenged him. As the second of 3 children and the only daughter, I grew up trying to prove myself worthy of a place at my father's table. I excelled in school, recited poetry from Robert Frost, and secretly dreamed of joining the U.S. Army after seeing soldiers rescue towns during the 1997 Mississippi floods. In 2003, when I was 15, I asked my father if I could apply for a summer military academy in Virginia. He laughed and said, "Girls don't belong in uniform. You'll marry a man in uniform perhaps, but you will never wear one." His dismissive tone cut deeper than a slap. I swallowed my hurt and studied harder. At Vicksburg High, I topped my senior class in science with a 4.0 GPA. I earned a scholarship to the University of Mississippi in Oxford in 2005, majoring in biochemistry. My father said the scholarship only proved I wouldn't cost him wedding money. I smiled through gritted teeth, promising myself that one day I'd earn my own place at the table. University opened my eyes. I met professors and classmates who believed women belonged everywhere, including the military. I joined the ROTC training on weekends at the local National Guard Armory. I learned to march, navigate obstacle courses, and fire a rifle. My father forbade me to continue, threatening to cut off financial support. My mother secretly slipped me $20 bills so I could afford gas to training. When Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005, I volunteered with the Army National Guard's relief operations in New Orleans. For 2 weeks, I carried supplies through flooded streets, treated injured children with basic first aid, and witnessed the courage of soldiers guiding traumatized families to safety. Standing on a levee overlooking devastated neighborhoods, I knew I wanted to serve permanently. I applied to the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, a 5-year program. My acceptance letter arrived in July 2007. I showed it to my father, heart pounding. He tore it in half, saying, "No daughter of mine will tarnish our family's honor by marching beside men." He announced that I would marry the son of a neighboring rancher in September. I refused. We argued late into the night. He accused me of ingratitude. I accused him of chauvinism. He raised his hand but stopped himself, shaking with rage. The next morning, I packed my books and left for Maryland with $300 in my pocket and my mother's whispered blessing. Before I tell you about the grueling training, the first time I held a soldier's life in my hands, and the unexpected camaraderie that shaped me, you need to understand the weight of defying a father who equates obedience with value because the court confrontation years later would mirror this early rebellion. USUHS was a world apart from the fields of Mississippi. The campus buzzed with cadets in pressed uniforms, the smell of polish and antiseptic lingering in the air. We rose at 4 a.m. for PT, ran laps around the parade ground, and attended lectures on anatomy, physiology, and medical ethics. In the evenings, we practiced suturing on foam pads and memorized drug dosages. Discipline was harsh, but I thrived under it. My instructors noticed my determination. Captain Rebecca Johnson, one of the few female officers, became a mentor. She encouraged me to aim for the highest rank possible. I quickly learned that excellence did not shield me from sexism. Male cadets whispered that women were only admitted to fill quotas. A senior instructor once remarked that women would faint at the sight of blood on the battlefield. I set out to prove him wrong. During our first field exercise in 2008, we were tasked with setting up a makeshift medical camp in a simulated disaster zone. When a male cadet dropped a heavy medical box on his foot and his toenail ripped off, several trainees gagged. I steadied my breathing, cleaned the wound, and stitched the skin with hands that did not tremble. "You have nerves of steel," Captain Johnson whispered later. The 2008 election season saw the college mobilize volunteers to assist local hospitals in Washington, D.C. I volunteered for a 10-day rotation at the D.C. General Emergency Ward. The ward overflowed with trauma victims and burn cases. I cleaned wounds, held IV bags, and comforted families. One night, a little girl with a bullet lodged in her shoulder clung to me, whispering, "Don't let me die." We stabilized her and she survived. That experience solidified my resolve. In 2009, I received news that my father had sold part of our ranch to finance my younger brother Billy's business venture. When my mother called, her voice quivered. "Your father says if you're determined to be a soldier, you're no longer his daughter," she whispered. I wanted to scream, but I channeled my fury into excelling further. I graduated top of my class in 2011 with an MD and was commissioned as a captain in the U.S. Army Medical Corps at the age of 23. My starting salary was $4,000 per month. I was assigned to a regiment stationed in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, where insurgency was rife. My friends and family pleaded with me to request a safer posting. I refused. "If male doctors can serve there, so can I said. Before I tell you about the insurgents' bullets whizzing past our ambulances, the day I performed surgery in a mud hut under fire, and the friendships forged in trenches, you need to understand that entering the battlefield was both a personal battle for recognition and a fight against a brutal insurgency, because every life I saved was another argument against those who had labeled me incapable. Helmand Province in late 2011 was a landscape of rugged mountains, winding dirt roads, and villages scarred by conflict. Our regiment's forward operating base sat near the town of Marja. It consisted of sandbagged bunkers, a small clinic, and a helipad. Our mission was to provide medical support to troops engaged in Operation Enduring Freedom and to deliver humanitarian aid to civilians caught in the crossfire. As the only female medical officer, I felt both honored and scrutinized. Every move I made was watched not just by my commanding officers, but by soldiers who had never seen a woman in uniform on the front lines. My days alternated between treating routine ailments, fevers, dysentery, shrapnel wounds, and facing mass casualty situations. In January 2012, our convoy was ambushed while returning from a vaccination drive in a remote village. Bullets ricocheted off armored plates. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the lead vehicle, flipping it. I crawled under gunfire to reach the burning truck, pulled out an unconscious sergeant, and applied a tourniquet to his severed leg. We radioed for air support and evacuated the wounded by helicopter. That night, as I cleaned dried blood from my boots, I realized that the horrors of war had become my classroom. In March 2012, a mortar round struck our base, collapsing part of the barracks. Several soldiers were trapped under rubble. I grabbed a medical kit and slid through a gap, ignoring the dust that burned my eyes. Inside, I found a young soldier, Tyler, pinned by a beam, his chest crushed. "I don't want to die," he whispered. I injected him with morphine, braced the beam with a jerry can, and with 2 engineers lifted it enough to pull him out. He survived, though he lost a lung. Later, his mother wrote me a letter. "You saved my son when God decreed it. "You are my daughter now." I cried upon reading it. The local population initially viewed us with suspicion, but over time, our free medical camps changed perceptions. We treated children with malaria, vaccinated pregnant women, and delivered babies under lantern light. I learned to speak basic Pashto to communicate with elders. One elderly man, who had lost his leg to an IED, told me through an interpreter, "You are a doctor like no other. Men may shoot guns, but you fight death." In July 2012, during a joint operation, our unit was pinned down near the town of Kandahar. A soldier's jugular was severed by shrapnel. Blood spurted. Under fire, I inserted a hemostat and sutured the artery, saving his life. For my actions during the ambush and subsequent operations, I received the Bronze Star with Valor in December 2012. My commanding officer noted in my citation, "Captain Amelia Carter displayed exceptional courage and composure under enemy fire, saving multiple lives." The news reached my hometown. My mother called, voice full of pride. My father remained silent. Before I tell you about the time I faced an internal battle more daunting than any firefight, the battle with my own injuries, and how that changed my perspective on service and family, you need to understand that each medal pinned on my chest was not just metal, but a shield against the insults my father hurled, because it proved I was somebody in a system that measures worth in bravery and sacrifice. In December 2012, just weeks after receiving the Bronze Star, our convoy hit a roadside bomb near the town of Nad Ali. The explosion lifted our vehicle off the ground and slammed us into a ditch. My head struck the roof. Ears ringing, I felt warm blood trickling down my neck. I glanced down and saw a shard of metal embedded in my thigh. Pain seared through me. I tied a field dressing around my leg and crawled to the driver, who was unconscious, his arm mangled. I splinted his arm with my rifle and administered morphine while calling for an evacuation. Minutes felt like hours. We were under sporadic sniper fire. Eventually, helicopters arrived, and we were evacuated to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda. The doctors removed the shrapnel and stitched my wounds. I had a concussion and a torn quadriceps. They told me I would need months of physiotherapy. Lying in the hospital bed, I felt frustration and vulnerability. For the first time, my body betrayed me. I feared being sidelined, losing the respect I had earned. During my recovery, I received dozens of letters from soldiers and their families thanking me. I also received my first letter from my father since 2007. It contained one sentence: "Get well soon." My father's grudging acknowledgement stung more than his silence. My mother visited me, bringing homemade peach cobbler and tears. "Your father reads the newspapers every day," she whispered. "He may not say it, but he is proud." Physiotherapy was grueling. I walked with a cane, my leg muscles weak. Some colleagues whispered that this injury might end my field career. Captain Johnson visited and urged patience. "Healing is also bravery," she said. I pushed myself, doing extra exercises and visualizing the battlefield. By June 2013, I returned to active duty, though I was reassigned to the Army Medical Corps training unit at Fort Benning to instruct new recruits. At Fort Benning, I met Major David Miller, an orthopedic surgeon. He was kind, humorous, and respected my ambitions. He taught me advanced surgical techniques and encouraged me to pursue further studies in trauma surgery. We became friends, sharing stories over coffee. He admired how I had defied my father and carved my own path. Slowly, friendship deepened into affection. We married in a small ceremony at the Post Chapel in October 2013. I wore my uniform, and my mother cried with joy. My father refused to attend. He sent a message through my uncle: "I do not condone this farce." I shrugged off his absence and focused on building a marriage built on mutual respect. David supported my plans to apply for a fellowship in trauma surgery at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio in 2014. I was accepted. The program was intense but rewarding. I learned to treat complex fractures, manage mass casualty incidents, and lead surgical teams. David and I discussed starting a family, but we decided to wait until my fellowship ended. We lived in a small apartment in San Antonio, balancing long shifts with quiet dinners. Before I tell you about the operation that tested our marriage and the mission that took David away permanently, you need to understand that recovering from injury taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, because the humility gained in hospital halls would later allow me to forgive the man who said I was nothing. In December 2014, the country reeled from the horrific attack on the base elementary school at Fort Campbell. David and I watched the news in stunned silence as reports of murdered children streamed in. The military launched Operation Freedom's Sentinel with renewed intensity. Surgeons were needed closer to the front lines to treat injured soldiers and civilians. When an urgent call came for volunteer trauma surgeons in eastern Afghanistan, David insisted on going. "This is why we trained," he said. I wanted to join him, but my fellowship director refused to release me mid-term. We argued briefly, then I kissed him goodbye at the helipad. "Come back," I whispered. He smiled. "Always." For weeks, I threw myself into my fellowship, performing surgeries late into the night. I called David whenever I could get a secure line. He sounded exhausted but determined. He told me about amputating limbs to save lives, about children who clung to him, and about the camaraderie among the medics. On January 15, 2015, he mentioned that his team would accompany a convoy delivering supplies to a remote base near the Pakistani border. 2 days later, I received a call from Captain Johnson. Her voice broke. "Amy, David's convoy was attacked," she said. "There was an IED. He didn't make it." The world tilted. I sank to the floor, phone clutched in my hand. David's funeral was held with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Soldiers carried his casket draped in the American flag. Guns fired salutes. I pressed my hand to the coffin, tears soaking my face. My father did not attend, though my mother stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders. After the burial, I sat by David's grave until dusk, recounting our dreams. Grief consumed me, but I returned to work. David had once told me, "We serve so others can live." I decided to complete my fellowship in his honor. I filed for benefits for surviving spouses, $150,000 compensation, and a monthly stipend of $1,500, but my father intervened. He claimed that as my father and head of the family, he was entitled to manage my finances through a family trust. I fought back, presenting my documents and insisting the funds be deposited directly into my account. The military's welfare branch sided with me. My father seethed. He accused me of being ungrateful for his sacrifices. Before I tell you about the mission in 2016 that thrust me back into the heart of conflict and the unexpected debt that forced my father into court, you need to understand that losing David hardened my resolve to be financially and emotionally independent because I would not let anyone, including my father, decide the price of my service and sacrifice. By 2016, I was one of the most experienced trauma surgeons in the Army Medical Corps. The military requested that I join a medical support team attached to a United Nations peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic. The mission aimed to stabilize regions torn apart by civil war and to provide medical assistance to refugees. I hesitated. The posting was for 6 months, far from home, and my mother was alone after my father's growing distance. But the opportunity to serve internationally and honor David's legacy propelled me forward. I accepted. In May 2016, I flew to Bangui with a contingent of American peacekeepers. Our field hospital operated in tents, treating gunshot wounds, malaria, and malnutrition. I collaborated with doctors from Bangladesh, Egypt, and Rwanda. We traded surgical techniques and stories of home. In June, rebels attacked a nearby village. Our hospital overflowed with injured civilians. I worked for 36 hours straight, amputating limbs and stitching faces. A young boy died on my operating table. Exhausted, I stepped outside and cried under the starry African sky. Our commanding officer, Colonel Baker, placed a hand on my shoulder. "You cannot save everyone, Captain," he said, "but you saved many." Back in Mississippi, my father faced financial ruin. My brother Billy's business had collapsed due to mismanagement. Billy had taken a loan of $400,000 using our ranch as collateral. When the bank sought repayment, my father asked me to bail them out. From Bangui, I transferred $80,000 to help with installments, but the debt was too large. My father grew desperate. He attempted to sell the remaining ranch without my signature. When the bank required co-owner consent, he forged my signature on the sale deed. The buyer, suspicious, filed a complaint. A summons was issued for both of us to appear in the Warren County Courthouse in October 2016. I learned of this while in Africa. Furious, I requested early leave to handle the matter. I returned in September 2016 and confronted my father. "How could you?" I demanded. He shrugged. "You owe me everything. I gave you life," he said. "You left me to join the army. You owe your family." I told him that forging my signature was a crime. He laughed. "Who will dare jail James Carter?" he boasted. The court date loomed. My mother begged me to settle and avoid scandal, but I refused to be bullied. Before I tell you about the courtroom showdowns, the moment my father publicly humiliated me, and the judge's unexpected intervention, you need to understand that the upcoming trial would not just decide the fate of our land, it would decide whether I could reclaim my identity as a daughter and a soldier, because the lines between personal and professional honor were about to converge in a single courtroom. The Warren County Courthouse, with its pale limestone walls and crowded corridors, buzzed with farmers seeking resolution to property disputes and families feuding over inheritance. On October 12, 2016, I entered the courtroom in my Army uniform, medals pinned on my chest, clutching a folder containing my documents. My father stood at the plaintiff's bench, flanked by his lawyer, a gray-haired man known for defending influential landowners. The opposing bench included the bank's lawyer and an investigator from the county attorney's office. The room fell silent when the judge, Judge Robert Hayes, entered and took his seat. The proceedings began with the bank's lawyer presenting evidence of the loan and my father's default. He submitted the forged sale deed with my allegedly co-signed signature. I calmly stated that I had been in the Central African Republic at the time of signing, presenting my deployment orders and stamped passport. The bank's lawyer confirmed that my signature did not match official records. My father, however, remained defiant. He stood and declared, "This girl is lying. She has always tried to rob me. She is nobody. She defied me, married without my consent, and abandoned our family. She thinks wearing a uniform makes her better than her father. She is a nobody." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. My cheeks burned, not from shame but from rage. I wanted to yell back that I had more courage than he ever had, but the judge held up a hand. "Mr. James Carter, this is a court of law. Your daughter's character is not on trial. Her signature is, he said. My father waved his hand dismissively. She acts like a hero, but she is nothing. He continued to rant about me choosing the army over family and claimed he had the right to sell the land because he was male head of household. Judge Hayes turned to me. Captain Amelia Carter, please approach the bench. I walked forward, spine straight. He looked at the medals on my chest, the Bronze Star with Valor and other campaign ribbons. He asked, Captain Carter, do you have proof of your service? I handed him my military file, which included my commissioning certificate, citations, deployment orders, and injury reports. He flipped through, his eyes widening as he read descriptions of my actions under fire. He paused at the citation describing the ambush in 2012. He then read aloud to the court. Captain Carter displayed exceptional courage and composure under enemy fire, saving multiple lives. He continued reading paragraphs about my service in Afghanistan and my fellowship in trauma surgery. Each sentence felt like a balm. The courtroom listened, rapt. My father fidgeted. He muttered, "She thinks this proves anything." Judge Hayes looked up and addressed my father. "Mr. Carter, you call your daughter a nobody. This file indicates otherwise. She risked her life for this country multiple times. The state recognizes her bravery. It is not the court's job to decide family honor, but you cannot forge your daughter's signature and then insult her service. The law is clear. The ranch cannot be sold without her consent." He then turned to the court clerk. "File criminal charges for forgery against Mr. James Carter." The room erupted in whispers. My father's face turned ashen. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized that a judge saw me not as a rebellious daughter, but as a citizen who had served with distinction. Before I tell you about the aftermath of this verdict, the impact on our family dynamics, and how my father's pride eventually crumbled, you need to understand that this moment in court was more than a legal victory. It was a validation of my existence, because a man who had called me nothing heard a stranger read my worth aloud. The verdict was swift. The court declared the forged deed void and referred my father's case to the criminal court. The bank agreed to restructure the remaining loan with my assistance. My father, stunned, was escorted out of the courtroom by bailiffs. He was released on bail pending trial. The town buzzed with gossip. James Carter, once untouchable, now faced charges because of his own daughter. My mother was mortified. Billy was furious, blaming me for airing family disputes. I felt a complex mix of relief and guilt. I had not wanted to see my father in handcuffs, but I could not let him manipulate me. In the months that followed, my father's trial proceeded slowly, as is common in the legal system. He pled guilty to forgery and received a suspended sentence and a fine of $50,000, payable to me for legal costs. The court also ordered him to attend financial literacy courses. I used the money to set up a small scholarship in David's name for girls in our county who wished to study medicine or join the military. I named it the Captain David Miller Memorial Scholarship and endowed it with $70,000 of my own savings. The first recipient, a bright 17-year-old named Natalie, called me crying with gratitude. I continued serving in the Army Medical Corps, now as a major. I participated in medical missions in the Mississippi Delta during droughts and in Tennessee during floods. In 2018, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and appointed head of trauma surgery at a military hospital in Washington, D.C. I supervised dozens of surgeons, ran drills, and ensured our hospital could handle mass casualties. I also launched weekend seminars for civilian doctors on trauma care. At home, my relationship with my father remained strained. He refused to apologize, clinging to the belief that he had acted to save the family. However, He began attending the financial literacy sessions at the court's mandate. My mother told me he listened quietly when instructors spoke of budgeting and avoiding risky loans. He stopped gambling on Billy's ventures. In 2019, he suffered a minor heart attack. My mother called me at midnight. I drove to Vicksburg and took him to the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson. In the emergency room, I held his hand as a cardiologist inserted a stent. "Why are you here?" he whispered. "Because you are my father," I replied simply. That night, our conversation softened. He confessed that calling me a nobody had been his anger at losing control. "I wanted you to follow tradition. I thought it kept us safe. I didn't understand your world," he said. I listened silently, tears streaming down my cheeks. Forgiveness was not immediate, but a crack appeared in our wall. In 2020, I used part of my military pension to build a community health clinic in our hometown. I named it the Sarah Health Center after my mother. It offered free vaccinations, maternal care, and health education. I hired 2 female doctors and trained local women as health aides. We recorded an infant mortality reduction of 40% in the first year. My father attended the inauguration. He stood in a corner, watching as villagers thanked me. Later, he whispered, "Our name is respected again." Before I tell you about how national crises like COVID-19 and the 2022 floods tested both our clinic and our family, and the final act of care that brought true reconciliation, you need to understand that building institutions allowed me to convert personal pain into public good, because by investing in others, I reclaimed the very legacy my father had tried to deny me. The COVID-19 pandemic reached the United States in early 2020. Our military hospital in Washington became a designated treatment center. I led a 50-member team in establishing isolation wards, training staff on PPE use, and implementing triage protocols. We faced shortages of ventilators and oxygen. I worked 16-hour shifts, treating soldiers and civilians alike. At the Sarah Health Center, we set up hand-washing stations and educated villagers about masks. My father, surprisingly, volunteered to distribute food packages to households under lockdown. He wore a cloth mask and stood in line with other volunteers, handing out sacks of flour and bottles of sanitizer. When he saw me walking toward the distribution point in my uniform, he nodded. We did not exchange words, but his actions spoke volumes. Hannah, my niece, contracted COVID-19 in June. She had mild symptoms, but my mother panicked. I reassured her and monitored Hannah's oxygen levels via video call. My mother later told me that my father sat by Hannah's bed all night, telling her stories of his childhood. His vulnerability eroded some of my anger. In August 2020, after months of relentless work, I developed a fever and tested positive for COVID-19. I quarantined in an isolation ward at our hospital. Alone in a sterile room, I felt weak and fearful. My father called daily. He told me stories of the cattle drives and promised to plant an oak tree in my name if I recovered. "You are not a nobody," he whispered on day 5. "You are my brave daughter." Those words, long withheld, soothed me as much as any medicine. I recovered after 2 weeks. True to his word, my father planted a sapling at our ranch. He placed a small sign, "Amy's Tree." In 2021, I was part of the national task force overseeing vaccine distribution. We coordinated with federal agencies, secured doses, and prioritized health workers and elders. At the Sarah Health Center, we vaccinated 10,000 villagers within 3 months. My father encouraged older farmers to get vaccinated, using his standing to dispel myths. He told them, "My daughter says this saves lives. Listen to her." The summer floods of 2022 devastated the Mississippi Delta and parts of the South. I coordinated with Army relief teams to set up mobile clinics. At 5 a.m. on August 30th, we airlifted supplies to the Delta region. I spent days wading through waist-deep water, treating children with diarrhea and rescuing elderly residents stranded on roofs. My father sent donations of $20,000 to our relief fund. In September, he accompanied me to distribute water purification tablets in Rolling Fork. He carried boxes alongside soldiers, his beard flecked with gray. Villagers recognized him and whispered, "James Carter is working with his soldier daughter." Before I tell you about the final years leading up to 2025, years of community service, new relationships, and the ultimate farewell that sealed our reconciliation, you need to understand that national crises became opportunities for healing because shared suffering and service blurred the lines between a proud father and a stubborn daughter, revealing a common humanity. By 2023, I had transitioned from active duty to a senior advisory role within the Army Medical Corps, focusing on training and disaster preparedness. I still wore my uniform, but I spent more time in offices than on the front lines. I missed the adrenaline but recognized the value of passing on knowledge. I also began lecturing at universities about public health and gender equality. During a seminar at Georgetown University in Washington, I met Professor James Morrison, a historian specializing in American conflicts. He admired my service and shared his own experiences researching unsung heroes of the United States. Our conversations ranged from the Civil War to modern counterterrorism. We bonded over our love of poetry and our belief that history must include women's stories. Over months, our friendship grew into a gentle romance. In December 2023, he proposed at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, quoting Robert Frost. "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by." He promised to support my mission and to honor David's memory. I consulted my mother and even my father, who surprised me by saying, "Choose happiness, daughter." I married Jim in April 2024. We held a simple ceremony at the Sarah Health Center courtyard. Soldiers, villagers, professors, and family gathered. My father walked me down the makeshift aisle, tears glistening. He whispered, "Forgive an old man." I squeezed his hand. After marriage, I divided my time between Washington and Georgetown. Jim and I co-wrote articles about the role of female soldiers in American history, highlighting stories from 1776 to the present. We established a scholarship at Wellesley College to fund research on gender and conflict. I continued overseeing the health center and chaired an advisory board for veterans' welfare. In June 2024, my father's health began to decline. Years of stress and poor diet had taken a toll. He was diagnosed with cirrhosis. The doctor recommended a liver transplant, but my father refused to consider me as a donor. "You've given enough," he said. Billy offered, but he was not a match. Eventually, a distant cousin donated. The surgery took place in October 2024. I stayed in the hospital room, adjusting IVs and monitoring his vitals like any daughter would. When he woke, he grasped my hand and whispered, "You are everything I never knew I needed." We cried together. My father's recovery was slow but steady. He began attending storytelling sessions at the Sarah Health Center, sharing memories of his youth and the Dust Bowl migration with children. He told them about his stubborn daughter who became a soldier. He admitted his mistakes and emphasized the importance of education and patience. He often repeated, "Honor is not in controlling others, but in serving them." I watched from the back of the room, heart full. Before I tell you about 2025's milestone events, celebrations, awards, and the final goodbye that cemented our forgiveness, You need to understand that these years of gentle acceptance and shared storytelling healed wounds deeper than any court verdict, because love expressed quietly over time can rebuild trust brick by brick. The year 2025 arrived with a sense of culmination. In January, the White House announced the Presidential Medal of Freedom for my contributions to military medicine and public health. During the investiture ceremony on March 23rd at the White House East Room, I stood alongside scientists, artists, and athletes. The president pinned the medal on my uniform. As cameras flashed, I scanned the audience and saw my father sitting upright in a wheelchair, smiling proudly with tears in his eyes. He saluted me. After the ceremony, he said, "You were always my pride. My ego blinded me. Thank you for not giving up on me." We embraced, a moment that felt like a lifetime. In April, the Sarah Health Center celebrated its 5th anniversary. We held a community festival with health camps, free eye checkups, and vaccination drives. Former scholarship recipients shared stories of attending medical school and joining the Army. Natalie, now a final-year medical student, announced she was engaged to an Air Force pilot. I laughed and joked that she had kept the tradition alive. My father cut the anniversary cake and told the crowd, "This center stands because of my daughter's stubbornness and vision. Listen to your daughters. They will lead you to better places." The villagers cheered. In June, Jim and I welcomed a baby boy. We named him David James Carter, honoring both my late husband and my new partner. Holding him for the first time, I felt an overwhelming blend of love and gratitude. My father held his grandson with trembling hands, whispering prayers. He often sat by David's cradle, singing old country folk songs. Hannah visited often, calling herself an auntie and reading stories to the baby. In August, I organized a national conference on veterans' health in Washington. We unveiled a comprehensive policy proposal for long-term care, mental health services, and economic reintegration for soldiers. The president promised to allocate $100 million for the initiative. During my keynote speech, I recounted my journey from being labeled a nobody to standing at the podium advocating for heroes. I acknowledged my family's transformation. "Reconciliation is possible," I said. "It requires honesty, accountability, and the courage to admit when we are wrong." The audience applauded. Some wiped tears. My father's health waned by autumn. His liver transplant bought him time, but not decades. On September 12, 2025, he passed away quietly in his sleep, aged 70. We buried him near the oak grove he had tended all his life. Soldiers, villagers, and relatives attended. I delivered a eulogy, speaking of a man who had been hardened by tradition but softened by love. I thanked him for teaching me resilience, even through hardship. I placed a handful of soil on his grave and whispered, "Rest, Daddy. We found each other." After the burial, I sat under Amy's tree with Jim and baby David. The wind rustled the leaves. I felt peace. Before I tell you about the final part of this story, a reflection on what being called a nobody taught me and the message I want to share with others who feel unseen, you need to understand that 2025 was not just an end, but a beginning, because love, legacy, and service now intertwine in ways I once thought impossible. Reflecting on the arc of my life, from a young girl told she could not dream, to a cadet stitching wounds under fire, to a surgeon advocating for national health policies, I realized that being called a nobody was not an end, but a catalyst. When my father dismissed me in court, he echoed a society that often denies women and nonconformists their identity. But the judge's reading of my military file did more than embarrass him. It affirmed me. The line between personal and public validation blurred. I learned that external recognition can heal internal wounds when it comes from a place of truth. After my father's death, I compiled my speeches, journals, and policy papers into a book titled From Nobody to Nation Builder, which I plan to publish in 2026 with proceeds going to the David James Scholarship Fund. I recorded a podcast series interviewing fellow soldiers, doctors, and daughters who defied expectations. In each episode, we discussed turning pain into purpose and reconciling with family without erasing our identities. The response on social media was overwhelming. Young men and women from rural areas messaged me, saying they felt seen. I also established the James Carter Institute for Reconciliation at the Sarah Health Center. The institute runs workshops for parents and children on conflict resolution, gender equality, and financial planning. It hosts monthly dialogues with elders and youth, bridging generational divides. I chose to name it after my father to honor the journey we took from court battles to forgiveness. As I spend evenings rocking baby David to sleep, Hannah reading at my feet, and Jim discussing future research, I know our story will not end in 2025. But I choose to conclude this chapter here, at a point where forgiveness, service, and legacy intersect. When people ask me how I found the strength to fight my father in court and then nurse him through illness, I tell them, strength is not a finite resource. It grows when we use it. And forgiveness is not a gift to those who hurt us. It is a release for ourselves. Type. Continue to receive the next part. In the months following my father's passing and the launch of the James Carter Institute for Reconciliation, I immersed myself in its programs. We hired social workers, financial counselors, and conflict mediators. Each week, we hosted sessions where fathers and daughters sat together, guided by facilitators who asked gentle but probing questions. What hopes do you have for each other? What mistakes have hurt you, and what apologies do you need? I watched burly farmers wipe tears as their teenage daughters spoke of wanting to attend college. I listened to grandmothers tell stories of marriages arranged at 16 and their desire to break that cycle for their granddaughters. The Institute also offered financial planning workshops. Our trainers taught families how to track income and expenses, avoid predatory loans, and prioritize education spending. We distributed budget ledgers with columns labeled for income, debt, savings, and charity. We invited representatives from the local farm credit union to explain safe borrowing. Within 6 months, 73 families enrolled in savings plans, collectively depositing $230,000 into community banks. One man told me, "For the first time, I know where my money goes. I can say no when my cousins ask for risky investments." Education remained a pillar of our work. We partnered with the Mississippi Department of Education to offer after-school tutoring in math, science, and English. We recruited volunteer teachers from our scholarship alumni. On a typical evening, the courtyard buzzed with children solving algebra problems while toddlers played with blocks. We installed solar panels on the roof to ensure electricity during outages. We also launched a mentorship program pairing teenage girls with female professionals, doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, who met monthly to discuss career paths and life skills. I mentored Natalie and 2 others interested in medicine, advising them on study habits and the entrance exam for Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. One of the most rewarding programs was our Restorative Justice Circle, inspired by practices from indigenous cultures worldwide. When conflicts arose, land disputes, inheritance disputes, or sibling rivalry, we convened a circle of affected parties, community elders, and mediators. People spoke one at a time, holding a carved wooden baton to signify respect. I watched as a young man who had threatened to abandon his pregnant wife tearfully apologized, citing the poverty he feared. His father admitted he had pressured him to prioritize a male heir. The wife spoke of her terror at being left alone. By the end of the session, they agreed to attend financial planning classes and promised to welcome their child, regardless of gender. The father stood and hugged his daughter-in-law. Running the institute taught me new lessons about patience and humility. I had spent years commanding surgical teams and drafting policies. Now I had to listen more than speak, to trust that change would come slowly through repeated conversations rather than single decrees. When donors asked about metrics, I offered stories as well as numbers. Yes, domestic violence referrals decreased by 20%, but more importantly, mothers reported feeling safe enough to call the helpline. Meanwhile, I continued to oversee the Sarah Health Center. We expanded services to include dental care and a mental health clinic staffed by a psychologist trained at Georgetown University. Mental health remained stigmatized in our community. To address this, we hosted open forums where I shared my own experiences with grief and insomnia after David's death. I stood on the clinic's veranda and told villagers about waking up screaming from dreams of explosions. I explained how therapy had helped me. One farmer, hands calloused from plowing, approached me after and said, "If you can speak of this, then maybe I can too." He booked an appointment. The Army noticed our work. In July 2025, the Chief of Army Staff sent a letter commending the Institute for fostering social cohesion. He approved a grant of $5 million from the USO to replicate our model in 3 other counties: Lowndes, Madison, and Holmes. I traveled with a team to train local leaders, sharing our curricula and lessons. We faced resistance. Some elders argued that outsiders shouldn't dictate social norms, but we found allies in teachers and preachers who had seen the benefits of our programs online. By December, the first satellite institute opened in Lowndes County, painted the same light blue as our building in Vicksburg, with murals depicting families planting trees and reading together. Before I tell you about the personal struggles I faced as I balanced national influence with local responsibilities, the backlash from some who said I was abandoning my military duties, and the surprising source of support that kept me grounded, you need to understand that deep community work revealed new layers of service. It taught me that medals and titles mean little if the people in your own hometown cannot live with dignity, because legacy is not just in laws passed or battles won, but in hearts transformed one conversation at a time. Type continue to receive the next part. Even as the Institute flourished, I felt the strain of wearing multiple hats. In August 2025, a conservative newspaper ran a column questioning whether I had abandoned the Army by focusing on social work. The writer acknowledged my military record, but argued that decorated officers should remain in uniform, implying that my foray into politics and community activism was vanity. The article spread on social media, sparking debates. Some commenters accused me of seeking fame. Others defended me, sharing stories of how the Sarah Health Center saved their children. I grappled with the criticism. I still worked part-time as a consultant for the Army Medical Corps, advising on disaster response and training surgeons. But I no longer served full-time in hospitals or on battlefields. Was I letting my comrades down? I confided my doubts to Jim. He reminded me that service takes many forms. "The Army taught you discipline and courage," he said. "Now you're applying those skills to heal society's wounds." Ryan, my environmental engineer friend from earlier stories, sent me a message. Don't let anyone shrink you. Your journey shows that duty evolves. Their words fortified me. In September, the Senate invited me to testify about the impact of our reconciliation programs on reducing domestic violence. I presented data and recounted case studies. A senator from a rural constituency asked if we were undermining traditional family structures. I responded, "We are strengthening families by teaching them to communicate and plan. Tradition that oppresses is not worth preserving." My bluntness angered some, but earned applause from women's rights activists. The media dubbed it Amy's bold stand. Meanwhile, I discovered that balancing motherhood, marriage, politics, and community work required constant negotiation. Baby David had begun crawling and demanded attention. Hannah needed help with school projects. Jim's research took him to archives in Boston. I sometimes felt like I was juggling glass balls, none could drop. I hired a trusted neighbor, Susan, as a nanny and relied on my mother's help. We established Sunday as a no-work day. We went to parks, read books, and cooked traditional dishes. These moments replenished me. In late September, I took baby David to my father's grave. I placed his tiny hand on the headstone and told him about the man who had tried to control me and the lessons we both learned. I whispered, "We forgive to be free." As the year progressed, we also faced security concerns. A handful of anonymous threats arrived at the Institute, accusing us of promoting coastal elite values. One evening, someone threw a brick through our window with a note. "Stop changing our culture." I reported the threats to the police. Military intelligence offered protection. I refused to be intimidated. I held a press conference, flanked by local preachers, teachers, and parents who supported our work. "We are teaching respect, responsibility, and resilience," I said. "If these are elite values, then perhaps we need more of them." The community rallied around us. Volunteers took night shifts at the Institute. Preachers preached about the emphasis on compassion and education. The threats subsided. In November 2025, I attended the inauguration of the Holmes County branch of the James Carter Institute. Standing beside the Sunflower River, I looked out at the assembled crowd. Women in bright sundresses, men in denim shirts, children waving flags. I spoke about my father's transformation and the power of dialogue. Afterwards, an elderly man approached me with tears. He said, "My son beat his wife. We came to your institute and learned to speak without anger. Now my son helps her wash dishes. I bless your parents' souls." I felt my eyes sting. Service had indeed evolved. Before I tell you about the final chapter of this tale, a letter I received that challenged my understanding of what it means to be seen, and the ultimate tribute we offered to the community. I want you to grasp that leadership invites criticism as much as praise, and that resilience is built not just through awards but through small acts of defiance against those who fear change. Because the true test of being somebody is not in the absence of opposition, but in the strength to stand firm when it comes. Type continue to receive the next part. On a chilly evening in December 2025, as we prepared for the Institute's year-end celebration, an unexpected letter arrived. The envelope bore an Army insignia. Inside was a handwritten note from an anonymous soldier stationed at a remote outpost in Alaska. He wrote, "Ma'am, I've never met you, but we know your story. When my father said I was a fool for joining the Army, I remembered how your father called you a nobody. I kept going. I just wanted you to know you inspired a soldier freezing on top of the world." I stared at the letter, tears welling. A man I would never know felt seen because I had spoken my truth. His words reminded me that stories ripple beyond our immediate circles. The year-end celebration at the Sarah Health Center combined a health fair, scholarship awards, and a remembrance ceremony. We distributed school supplies to 200 children, blood pressure monitors to elderly villagers, and nutritional kits to expectant mothers. We awarded scholarships to 10 new students, including 2 boys who wanted to study nursing. I insisted that the scholarships be gender neutral. Sons also needed to learn caregiving. At dusk, we lit lanterns around the pecan grove and projected a slideshow of photos: soldiers in muddy trenches, surgeons in operating rooms, fathers and daughters in reconciliation circles, farmers learning to budget, children vaccinated at our clinic, my father speaking to a crowd. During my closing speech, I read the Alaskan soldier's letter aloud. The audience fell silent, then erupted in applause. I spoke of invisibility and recognition, of how being called a nobody can be a gift when it propels us to redefine ourselves. I thanked my mother, who sat in the front row wiping tears, for whispering words of courage when my father forbade me from pursuing my dreams. I thanked David for teaching me to serve without fear, Jim for believing in my evolution, and my father for the challenge he posed that forged my resilience. I invited the crowd to write letters to someone who inspired them. Hundreds of notes were collected, addressed to teachers, mothers, doctors, farmers, and even to themselves. We planned to deliver them in the new year. As the night ended, we unveiled a sculpture commissioned from a local artisan, a bronze figure of a woman in uniform holding a stethoscope in one hand and a book in the other, standing on a base engraved with the words, "From Nobody to Nation Builder." My mother and Billy pulled the cloth away, revealing the statue illuminated by soft lights. Children gasped. Some saluted it. I placed baby David's hand on the bronze foot and whispered a prayer, that his generation would never have to fight to be seen. I returned home that night, drained but filled. I tucked Hannah into bed, kissed Jim, and rocked baby David until he slept. I sat by my window, listening to distant villagers' laughter and the hum of a generator, and wrote in my journal. The judge read my file and showed my father that I was somebody. Today, a soldier in Alaska read my life and felt seen. That is the power of story. My father's insult became a seed. My service, the soil. My community, the water. And now we have a forest of change.